Hello everyone, my name is Garvin and I read things and natter about them on the internet for your entertainment. Last week we finished our worldwide roundup of merfolk mythology, but we're going to take some time to look at a couple variations on the standard form of the mermaid. In this case, we're going to look at stories of twin-tailed mermaids, for example like the one that graces coffee cups all over the world in every Starbucks shop. Before I start, I do want to mention that this topic was chosen by my Everwise patrons, whose ranks you can join for as little as $1 a month by clicking on the link in the description below. If you'd rather just leave a one-time donation, there's also a link to my Ko-fi site, and if you do leave a donation there, please feel free to leave a request for a video or a review if you have something in mind. Having gotten that all out of the way, let's continue on our quest to reach the bottom of the endless pool that is merfolk lore. The first evidence we have of twin-tailed mermaids comes from the Lorestan bronzes, which is a name given to bronze figurines found in western Iran, specifically in the Lorestan province. They date from around 1000 to 650 BC, and they're figurines of a wide array of animals and mythological figures, including one referred to as the Lady of Animals, which is shown as human from the waist up, with a pair of fish-like legs curling up to either side of her, which makes for a very suggestive position, let's call it. This would be Echo in the Scythian snake goddess, which accompanied Artimpasa. I'm sorry, there's no pronunciation guide for her name, but she was a Scythian goddess of marriage and fertility. Some of my sources have even suggested that the snake-legged goddess would be the inspiration of the myths of Echidna, the half-snake, half-woman monster of Greek myth, but I'm kind of wandering about a bit. The Lady of Animals, from what I can find, was worshipped as a fertility goddess and may have been assimilated with Ishtar and other goddesses of the wilderness and fertility, which I suppose shows that mermaids have been linked to what we'll call romance in reference to our dread Lord Algorithm, dare be on his name, from the very beginning of human history. Now, we do see some continuation of this trend. For example, there's Greek and Roman art that shows the Tritons as having two tails, which continues this link of twin-tailed mermaids to the divine. Meanwhile, on an Iranian island located in the Persian Gulf called Hormuz Island, which is mostly inhabited by a melting pot population, the descendants of African slaves, Indian and Arabic traders, along with Iranian natives. This is because the island was once a major trading port, but today it's mostly just a small fishing community. It does, however, preserve the myth of Meldidas, and I do apologize to any Farsi speakers listening. I couldn't find a pronunciation guide, so that's my best guess. The Meldidas is a twin-tailed mermaid who is one of those mermaids that is here to eat people. She poses as a beautiful young woman, hiding her tails under the water to get men to come close enough, where she grabs them, turns into an ugly old woman, and tears her victims apart with her bare hands. Unlike most depictions of twin-tailed mermaids, however, her tails are crossed over and closed, which presents a very different image than most of the pictures of twin-tailed mermaids. Maybe this is meant as a warning, or maybe I'm just reading too much into the art depictions. You tell me. There are, however, myths in other parts of the world of twin-tailed mermaids, like the Filipino Mambu Buno. And again, no pronunciation guide, so I'm kind of winging it here, so apologies to any natives of the Philippines who heard that. Now, the males are described as having dark, slimy scales, but the women are described as having bright, vividly colored scales, And as you can guess, it's the ladies that the mythology focuses on here. In this case, the mermaids hunt for a human husband. She will lure in a man and marry him and keep him an unwitting prisoner in her home, which is said to be full of gold and precious gems. And I gotta admit, why are these places always described as opulent but never described as comfortable? I mean, gold is shiny, yeah, but I'll take a nicely cushioned, comfortable couch over a gold chair for sitting on. To me, gold is only worthwhile in what you can get for it, and if it's lining the walls, you ain't getting anything with it. These ladies, I think, should invest in libraries, maybe an entertainment center, some board games. That would sound more tempting to me to, hang around for eternity. Now, if these guys perhaps get bored of staring at golden walls encrusted with gems they're never going to use for anything, so they go, hey, can I visit my folks? They will find that they have been gone for years and everyone they knew is dead, because everything is so blissful apparently that years seem like days. And gee, where have we heard that before, right? This seems to be a reoccurring theme in these stories. You shouldn't try sneaking out, though, because if you try leaving without permission, she will flat out drown you and leave your body in a sitting position at the bottom of the river. So, ask nicely before you try to leave, I guess. That said, the undisputed rock star queen of the twin-tail mermaid world is, without a doubt, the Lady Melusine, which is the primary character of a well-known French mermaid story, although it actually starts with her mother, the fairy lady Prancina. Now, Prancina met the king of Albania, or he was the king of Scotland, or the king of Norland, depending on who's telling the story. Either way, in most of my sources, this king of somewhere was named King Helmas, and he fell in love upon meeting her next to a fountain in an enchanted glade, and after some of the standard wrangling, she agreed to marry him, with a condition that he'd never visit her during her lying in. Now, I should explain that term. Lying in was an old European term for a period of bed rest that women, well, at least wealthy women, took after giving birth, and this could range from about 9 to 20 days, depending on how hard the birth was, how long the woman could afford to take bed rest, all manner of things. During this period, she is supposed to be cared for by female relatives, so sisters, aunts, mothers, the whole gambit. And it is considered appropriate for friends and family to visit her and bring gifts for her and, of course, the new child. Honestly, I don't want to overstate the effectiveness of something like this, but I do think this could help with at least some cases of post-birth depression. I mean, it wouldn't be a cure-all, but in at least milder cases of depressions, a sustained affirmation of support and care does help. And even beyond that, having a period where you ease this young lady into the rather demanding role of motherhood couldn't hurt either. But I'm wandering about, so let's get back to the story. Sorry about that. Well, all things considered, the marriage went rather well until Prancina gave birth to triplets, 3 girls, the youngest being our mermaid. And Helmas, when he heard this, was just so damn excited that he forgot all about his oath and burst right in to congratulate his wife and to meet his daughters. He was just so thrilled. But in the tradition of Fae spouses, Prancina, although she didn't have any hatred or malice towards her husband for this, he had broken his word, so the marriage was over. She gathered up her infant children and just disappeared. When the girls were 15, she sat them down and told them the story of why dear old dad wasn't around, and Melusine decided revenge was called for. And she talked her sisters into it. So they went out, probably breaking curfew, caught dear old dad, and imprisoned him in the heart of a mountain. Which mountain, you ask? Good question. Go ask Melusine, because no version of this story agrees with any other version on which mountain this dude is imprisoned in. Well, Mom cottoned on, and she was incredibly unhappy because while Helmos had broken his word, he hadn't done it out of malice, and no one actually got hurt by his actions. So she cursed her youngest daughter to be part fish, or part serpent, depending on who you ask, on the 7th day of the week until she found a husband who would never try to peek in on her. This kind of tells me where Melusine got her tendency to overreact, because honestly, I feel like justice would have been served by making her let dad go, forcing her to apologize, maybe do, Daddy Dearest a favor to make up for it, or even just ground her from fairy magic for a couple of months. This I curse you to live as a human-fish hybrid one day out of the week until you find a dude who's willing to let you hide out in a bathtub during that day without asking questions. It's a little over the top. It's a little much, I think. Maybe I'm wrong. I'll let you guys fight that out in the comments. Now, here's an interesting tidbit for you here, though. That whole prologue I just gave you was actually added to the story after it had already been popular for quite some time. This part of the story was created last. And it comes to us from a gentleman named Jean Darris, who was secretary to the Duke of Berry, who turned around and ordered this poor man to gather up all the lore about Melusine, put it in a coherent form, and pass it over to the Duke's sister, the Countess de Bar. Jean Darris claimed he got this story from a history entitled The Race of Lucinia in Italian, but no such history has ever been found. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean he made this whole thing up entirely, but it does suggest that it's not originally part of the story. That said, I honestly think it's a good addition, which is why I used it here, but I'm going to give you full disclosure. That whole bit is not part of the original mythology. The story proper starts with Raymond, the son of a poverty-stricken count, who is adopted by a wealthier uncle or cousin. My sources are unclear, but he was the Count of Poitou. Raymond basically became the Count's best friend, and they often hunted together. Well, one day they were hunting wild boar, and they got separated from the main hunting party, and they got lost in the woods with night falling. So they decided to, just camp out for the night and try and get their bearings in the morning, and they tried to start a fire. And that's when they were found by the wild boar. A desperate, confused battle took place, where through bad luck, Raymond achieved a double kill. He got the boar, and he also got the Count. Horrified and despairing to his fate, he dropped his sword, leapt on his horse, and fled. He rode until he came into an enchantingly beautiful glade with a fountain and 3 gorgeous blonde ladies who asked him what was the matter, because he was very clearly worked up and in some manner of distress. Now, maybe I'm just cold and untrusting, but I wouldn't admit to people I just met that I was guilty of manslaughter. But Raymond is either a more trusting soul than I am, or maybe he's just an impulsive and emotional thinker, because he just tells them everything, holds nothing back. One of the ladies, after listening closely, tells him that the solution is simple. Ride back to the castle and tell everyone you got separated from the Count. When the body is found, they'll blame the boar for the Count's death and assume that the Count killed the boar as his last act on Earth, because that is the most straightforward and simplest solution. Raymond listened, nodding along, and decided he had found the perfect woman. She was smart, she was beautiful, she was cold-bloodedly willing to help him cover up a possible crime without any judgment against him. What more could he ask for, right? So he asked her to marry him on the spot, but continuing his policy of radical honesty, which I'm not going to fault him for, he admitted he didn't have much in the way of land or wealth. She told him that wasn't a problem, but to ask the heir of the Count who was just killed for a gift of land, which the audacity of this woman. Not a lot of land, just as much land as she could stretch a single stag's hide over. Raymond did so. So, just to be clear, he goes to the heir of the man he killed after lying about it and straight up hits him up for land. Just the sheer audacity here on display amazes me. And Melusine promptly turns the stag hide into thread and uses it to get a really nice chunk of land. At this point, when Raymond's new fiancée begged him not to look in on her on Saturdays, he figured if that's all his wife wanted from him, then he was a lucky man. And you know, considering everything she's done for him, hard to disagree. Melusine was very quick to tell Raymond that she was actually a fairy princess, which is why he couldn't see her on Saturdays, and she was going to prove it. She used her magic to literally pull a castle into existence from the very ground of their new land, and they named the state Lucinia. Melusine would expand and strengthen her home using her magic to make a fortified palace that was the envy of Europe. And she and her husband would soon give birth to a son who was a very healthy boy, but he had one red eye, one green eye, a very large mouth, and rather large ears, so not the most attractive son. Their second son, who was also very healthy and very strong, he was just born with a bright scarlet face. And thankful for two healthy boys, even if their looks could be slightly disturbing, they built a convent to give thanks for their health, and she built a second castle for her second son to inherit. And things continued in this manner. For example, the third son had one eye that was higher up on his face than the other. The fourth son was born covered in hair with long claws. The fifth son was born with just a single eye, and the sixth son was born with a boar-like tusk. I kind of wonder if Raymond sweated a little seeing that. But all their children were born healthy and strong and survived infancy and childhood. So, considering the infant mortality rate of the time, what's a little bit of disfigurement in the family, you could say? Well, despite some irregularities about their looks, all the boys grew up to adulthood, and with one exception, they all became very acclaimed, almost heroic figures. And that one exception was the boy who entered the church and became a very famous monk for his piety. Raymond, for his part, honored his wife's request throughout those years and lived in health, wealth, and peace. And he considered himself as having a very good deal in life. And if you ask me, he was right. However, his family would wreck this. You see, Raymond had brothers, and they would often visit because he was the most well-off out of the crew, and eventually they started telling him, hey, dude, people are starting to talk. I mean, what is your wife doing all alone on Saturday night. Is she even alone on Saturday night? At first Raymond laughed it off, but once that seed was planted, it started to grow, and it gnawed on the back of his mind, until after years of wedded bliss, he broke his word. Which is a very bad idea if you're married to a magical creature. I think the last 15 or so videos I've done have displayed this repeatedly. Raymond snuck in, and he saw her in her fish or snake hybrid form, again depending on who's telling the story. His heart twisted, and his stomach dropped. Not because he was repulsed by her, but because he was terrified of losing his wife due to his stupidity now that he understood why she demanded he stay away from her on Saturday. So Raymond decided he would do what he had been doing this whole time. He would keep his damn mouth shut. Now, for some time, Raymond managed to do exactly that, until disaster struck. He and his wife received word that one of their sons attacked a monastery that the son that had went into the church was serving at. So, what they had found out is that one of their sons had not only burnt a monastery to the ground and looted it and killed consecrated churchmen, but he had also murdered his own brother in the process. So they managed to lose 2 sons in one blow here. And Raymond was distraught. He was devastated by this. And when Melusine went to comfort her husband in his distress, he spoke unwisely, screaming out, "Away from me! Away, odious serpent, contaminator of my honorable race!" Now, I'm not sure how to have that conversation of, "Hey, love of my life, I know you turn into a half-human, half-thing on Saturdays, but it's cool. And I've never been married, but I'm very sure you should never call your wife odious or contaminator of your honorable race." And I'm pretty sure this is not how you have that conversation. Raymond realized what he had said, and he regretted it the instant the words left his mouth, and he begged for her forgiveness. And shockingly enough, maybe she had gotten mellow over the years, but Melusine did give him her forgiveness. But his actions had consequences. She had to leave. Their marriage was done. But sadly, she turned to him and said, "I will return." And so it was, whenever a lord of the family was to die, she would appear beforehand, flying over the ramparts of the castle, wailing her grief. And in time, the kings of France would claim her as an ancestor, and say they could see her when the prior king passed away. Which kind of makes me wonder where she was during the French Revolution, but I'm going to leave that to the fanfic writers. You heard me, boys and girls, get to work. One last note I want to make here. Now, throughout the medieval era, sirens were increasingly presented in art as twin-tailed mermaids. And that became kind of an interesting thing in its own right, but the story of Melusine became to dominate how twin-tailed mermaids were seen and discussed in fairy tales and mythology, and I think you can see why, because this story works fairly well as the archetype mermaid stories. It has a lot of the themes and traditions that we see in various cultures with mermaid stories. There's transformation. There's a heavy focus on, let's call it romance, because we need to avoid the wrath of our dread Lord Algorithm. Terror be on his name. There's the idea that relationships between merfolk and humans are doomed to tragedy. and there's this idea of a mermaid as a figure of magic and supernatural power. And this holds true until we get to, like, the post-colonial Victorian era, and mermaids not only get pulled out of the fairy fae category, but they're gradually reduced in power until we get to The Little Mermaid. But that's something I'll discuss when we talk about mermaids in popular culture. I think this is a good place to stop for the week. I do want to thank everyone for listening. I hope you found this video informative, or at least entertaining. If you did, please leave a like, a comment, or even subscribe. All of these help me in my eternal struggle against the dread Lord algorithm. Terror be on his name. I'd like to give a special thanks to Big Steve, my biggest patron supporter. These videos could not happen without your support. Next week, we're going to look at tentacled mermaids, and we're going to have a discussion about why you should be wary about mythology sources, or just sources in general that you find on the internet. I hope you join me, but until then, look after yourselves, look after each other, and of course, keep reading!